Here we go. We're at the fourth chapter, the fourth parak in Sefer Shoftim, and things get really interesting now. This story, no doubt, most people know about this story. No doubt, many people have learned this story, but I guarantee you that there's so much more. Every time we learn, every time we deepen this, there's so much more to the story as well. So let's jump straight in. Our story actually revolves around a lot of women leadership, women in plural. We're going to see as we open this up. But let's do a quick summary, a high-level summary, and then we'll try to address some of the major issues as well. And by the way, I've taught this multiple times over the course of years, and each time there's just more and more to find. One is never really at the point of full achievement of understanding all the details. But let's start at the beginning. We know that we last left our heroes where they had been saved by a person by the name of Ehud ben Gera from the tribe of Binyamin. And then we had this mysterious person in the middle called Shamgar ben Anas. And we don't really know so much about him because there's only one pasuk which describes him. We don't even know which shevet he comes from. That was the discussion we had at the end of last time's learning. But now we hear the first parak the first pasuk in our parak already tells us that things are going south. And that is Vayasuv b'nei Yisrael asas ra b'nei Hashem ve'ehud meis. Their leader's gone and they're doing bad. So things are not going in the right direction. What ends up happening? Vayim kareim Hashem b'yad Yavin melech Canaan. And they were sold in the hands of this person by the name of Yavin, who was the king, one of the kings of Canaan. Hashem malach b'chatzor, who lived or ruled in a place called Chatzor, v'sar tzavois Sisra, v'yoshe b'charosh hagoyim. And he now was in this place called Charosh hagoyim, we'll see. And his general was a person by the name of Sisra. Okay, good. And we're told that they have military dominance because they have 900 iron chariots, and these dominate the valley. This is the Jezreel Valley in the north, so they're dominating the lowlands of the Galilee, where they are able to oppress the nation of Israel. So it's a bad situation, and for 20 years Israel lives oppressed by these folks, these Canaanites. Then the camera shifts and we hear about our leader of the day, and her name is Devorah. And so we hear Devorah Isha Neviah. She is a prophetess. Eishes Lapidos. She's the wife of a man by the name of Lapidos, and she was a judge. In fact, we hear about the location of a judgment. She sits under Tomer Devorah. She sits under this palm tree, and that's where she receives any questions or any issues of the day come to her in such a location. Now, she lives actually in an area in Har Ephraim, which is much further south. She sends to Barak ben Avinoam, who is from Kedesh Naphtali, which is where all the action is happening, and she says to him, I have a message from Hashem to you. You should go and gather your folks, bring 10,000 people from Naphtali and Zevulun, and go and bring them to Har Tabor, to Mount Tabor, and Hashem will give these people in your hands. Barak says, listen, I will go if you accompany me. Apparently she has the gravitas as a leader to be present, and he wants her with him. And she says a very strange and enigmatic sentence, which we'll unpack in multiple levels. But she says in Pasuk Tes, V'tamer, Haloch elechimoch, I will accompany you to this battle. Ephes, but Ki loy tiyeh tifartecha al aderech asher ata alech ki biyadi shayim kar Hashem es Sisra. I will go, but know that your grandeur will not be in your hands, because Sisra will be sold in the hands of a woman. Not clear if she's warning him, if she's leveraging him, if she's taunting him. It's not clear what exactly she's doing right now, but we'll come back to this observation that she makes. Now we go straight into the battle. It's an unbelievable battle. They go up to, Barak goes, he recruits the people, because remember, there's not a regular army, there's no national guard, there's no army per se. He goes, literally village to village. If you've ever gone to Minuteman National Park up in Boston, and you got to read the history of how the War of Independence occurred. That's how it worked, right? They ran from Boston northwards, from village to village to village, to Concord and to say, let's go out, and all the people with their pitchforks and their, the guns, that's how it worked. So he goes around and he gets everybody together. There's 10,000 people. They go out to Mount Tabor, which is one of the mountains in the area. They're on top of the mountain. Sisera hears about this. He sends out his army. He gathers his folks, 900 chariots, many people. They come down to the bottom of the valley because now there's no way to get out. And then we hear this unbelievable victory. We hear Vayered Barak Mehar Tavar. He comes out. So the Israelites descend into the valley to where they are going to be mowed down, essentially, because they don't have chariots; they're just infantry. But in Pasuk Tezvav we hear Vayaham Hashem es Sisera v'es kol harechev v'es kol hamachaneh lefi cherev lifnei Barak. Hashem confused them, and they all fall by the sword. Vayered Sisera me'al hamerkava v'yanos beraglav. So much so that Sisera himself gets a foot and starts running away, and every other chariot man, every other soldier is killed in this battle. So the entire army of the Canaanites is wiped out, a clean wipeout. That happens over here. The story continues. The camera follows Sisera, and now Sisera is running, and he passes by the tent of Chever HaKeni. Chever is an ally to the Canaanites. He lives in the locale, and the wife of Chever beckons him to come in. Her name is Yael. She is not Jewish. The way we use the name Yael today for many Jewish girls, it's wonderful. It wasn't a Jewish name. She's a wonderful heroine. But this is a Cani. They're from a different tribe. And she invites him in. He says to her, if anybody comes asking, stand by the door and say you never saw anybody. Yeah, she says, no worries. She gives him something to drink. She covers him with a blanket. And then I always like, this is where the best phrase comes, is she pegged him. Right? So she takes the tent peg, she takes the mallet, and she drives straight through his head into the ground. That was and literally he kills him in his sleep. And then as Barak is kind of finishing up the battle, is passing by her tent, she says, the man that you're searching for is here, and she shows him murdered on the floor, and that is the end of the battle. And in the future years, the parak closes the pasuk V'chavdal Yad Yibnei Yisrael halach v'kasher al Yavin v'melech Canaan asher hichrisai es Yavin melech Canaan. So they basically the hand of Israel is getting stronger and stronger and stronger until they finally manage to throw off the yoke of Yavin. Because remember, Yavin is the king, Sisera is the general. Sisera has been killed, but if there's details of the story that I'm missing, then come back next week, because there is a song called Shiras Torah, which is Perek, and in that song there's lots more details which we'll deal with then. But this is the narrative as described by Tanakh. We'll come back to the reflections on the narrative, which there's much of in the song itself. Okay, let's stop for a second. One of the things that, if you were focusing when we learned Sefer Yoshua, you will notice that there's something very odd about this whole business. Because when you start at the beginning is, who is Yavin? And the problem is that we've met him beforehand, but he was killed. So, in fact, if you go back to Sefer Yoshua, Perek Yud Aleph, the beginning of the Perek Yud Aleph tells us about the third alliance, or the third major battle that's happened in with Yoshua, the Israelites, the nascent Israelite nation, as they come into Israel. And here we have it. Look who the ringleader is in those days. This is more than a century before our story. In the second source, Torah page 3, Vayhi kishmoa Yavin melech Chatzor vayishlach es el Yovav melech Madon ve'el Shimron melech Achshav ve'el HaMelachim asher mitzalfon v'harava negev kinrois v'nashafel v'nafois dor v'yam. Akranim mimizrach hayam goes on to describe, and he brings them all together. So the king of Chatzor is a man by the name of Yavin. He brings together an alliance, a conglomerate of nations against Israel, and Israel destroys all of them, and they burn down Chatzor. So that's interesting, because here we have Yavin, the king of Chatzor. But it's like, is he a ghost? We killed him. He's gone. He's no longer here. Chatzor was burnt to the ground. So what's going on over here? That should be just the first thing that we should notice, just by notice looking in the psukim. Oh, excellent. Good, excellent. So this happens to be, it seems to be that Yavin is not a personal name, it seems to be the name of office. Much like Pharaoh, but there's another one who's a name of office, is Avimelech. Avimelech keeps coming back. There's not one Avimelech, there's a bunch of Avimelechs. Avimelech is the name of the Philistines in the area of Gaza, in the Gerar area. Okay, so it happens to be the first thing to notice is clearly we're dealing with a name of office, not the name of a person. Okay, and by the way, we have records, historical records. This as an example, I'll just in the source 4, I put the Mari fragment. It talks about Yavin of Chatzar, right? You see those little scratches in the that's called cuneiform. They'll take a reed in the wet clay to in Ugaritic to write out their letters. And in the old Ugaritic, this refers to Yavin, the king of Chatzar. Okay, so let's say that it's the name of office, yeah?
Maybe it's a descendant.
Definitely a descendant. So there's definitely a bloodline here. But the problem is, oh yeah, so maybe a great-great-grandson, yeah. So it could be as well that he assumed that name, but there's clearly a historical replay here. Now here's the interesting thing. The problem is that they did burn down Chatzar. It says so explicitly. So what's Chatzar happening here? Like meaning what that is? If you read the Psukim carefully, it might be that we maybe misunderstood the Psukim. Let's go back to that second pasuk in the Perek, where at the very beginning it says, "Vayimkarem Hashem b'yad Yavin melech Canaan, Hashem malach b'Chatzar, who ruled in Chatzar, v'sar tzavos Yisrael v'yoshev b'chashar Rosh Hagoyim." One possibility is they are not living in Chatzar. Right? Chatzar is destroyed. It could be that they're really living in Charosh Hagoyim, which is an unknown, unidentified spot, but that he did. But the reason why it's bringing it back is because he is reliving this. This is his revenge, right? So, I am Yavin, the descendant of Yavin, who lived in Chatzar. I'm in Charosh Hagoyim. I'm taking revenge. So even the Psukim itself speak to the fact that maybe we have, we'll call it round 2 of the same battle is being fought. The Radak actually addresses this because every is aware of this. It's not like this is not new news. The Radak says in source 3, says, Kodem shikam Yoshua v'hechrivam, before Yoshua destroyed them, the Sarafes Chatzor Malko he called Cherev, he killed the king and he burnt it down. V'yavin hu sheyiyeh melech Chatzor oz, u'mash nish'aru me'osa mishpacha holchu lecharosh hasagoyim v'nisyashvu sham. So maybe this is the as you said, Mary, like the continued family, the re-established family, which is why, by the way, when you conquer people, you have to kill all their heirs. Right? Because otherwise what happens is, as sad as it sounds, right, it's not in battles, but like, in the end of the day, they're going to come back, right? So, Banquo, right? So you have to make sure they're all gone, right? Because otherwise they come back and they have a vengeance when they come back, right? So if you read Macbeth, right? Banquo, right? So this is when the bloodline stays, then the revenge line stays as well, and Yavin is back, and he is quite happy to take advantage of the situation. It is worthwhile noting that if you look at the end of the Malbim in source 5, he makes this point. He says, "V'hu shamar alehem eva mikvar." This Yavin has a vendetta, right? So this Yavin has a vendetta. He's trying to pay back because of that a century previous destruction. Now, just to understand the picture of where this is, look at the top of page 4. I put in a map over here of the battles. The main battles were fought in the heartland. There's Jericho, Ai, and then there was the battle of the 5-king alliance around Jerusalem. But if you go more, we're talking about the north area where we're in Chatzar. Chatzar is to the north of the Galilee. Be'ezrat Hashem, in our Shoftim trip, we will be visiting Chatzar, Be'ezrat Hashem, because Chatzar is the biggest archaeological dig in Israel. Most people are not aware of this. This is the biggest Canaanite city, and the most amount of research has been done in Chatzar. Okay, so this huge Canaanite city, Tel Chatzar, it's massive. So last time we went to Tel Lachish, this is bigger than Lachish. This is huge. Okay, so in Chatzar, it's interesting that it was first uncovered by Yigal Yadin, right, the great warrior and archaeologist, and his student was a person who spent his entire life, just passed away recently. His student spent all his life, his career researching Chatzar. His name was Dr. Amnon Ben Tor, and he writes in an essay that he wrote around 10 years ago. He points out Chatzar was not destroyed by accidental fire, an earthquake or a natural catastrophe. The destruction clearly was a result of human activity, as indicated by the large number of statues of deities and rulers that were intentionally disfigured by cutting off their heads and hands. So when the destruction happened, the idols in this location were dismembered. So that should be an indicator this was not a natural tragedy. Since we have no record mentioning the destruction other than the book of Joshua, the only way to go about answering the question of who destroyed Chatzor is to consider all the peoples who were around at the time, examining whether any of them were regarded as possible candidate for the city destroyer. So, obviously it points towards Israel, the destruction of Chatzor, because you can carbon date it back to the 13th century BCE, which is generally accepted to be the time when the nation of Israel are coming into the land of Israel, so it matches up. There is a little bit of intrigue, if you want to do some further research, is because Chatzor was actually destroyed twice. Chatzor was destroyed about 150, 200 years beforehand in the 15th century BCE, which leads archaeologists, minimalists, to say, you see, it's not the Israelites and so on. I don't know if that discounts from the fact that there was an Israelite destruction and there was a success in the interim. Some would even argue that maybe if there's a discussion about dating the Israelite entrance, was it Israelite entrance in the 13th century BCE or in the 15th century BCE? Was it earlier? If it's earlier, you might even be able to say that there were two destructions at the hands of the Israelites, one's at the hands of Joshua and one at the hands of Devorah. So it could be that these two destructions actually map out Sefer Yehoshua and Sefer Shoftim, but be it as it may, there's a lot of reading that's worthwhile going into, but we do know that in the 13th century BCE, this place was destroyed, was burnt to the ground, the idolatry was dismembered, and Dr. Amnon Torah feels that it was clearly the Israelites because we have the record written in the book of Yehoshua about such a thing that happens. Now, we come back to the protagonist, that's our antagonist. Our protagonist in our story is a person by the name of Devorah. Devorah literally means a bee. Right, so it literally means a bee, but we don't. That doesn't help us understand more about her. So the Mefarshim and the Gemara tries to dig in and try to understand what about her. Who is she? What is she doing? What's her role? And so we hear a few things that are interesting about her. We hear that she's the Eshes Lapidot, right? So there is a Jewish name which goes around still today. Lapidos, right, is a Jewish last name. It has it's clearly a name which is still in use. But what is interesting is who was this person? Because we don't have a record of another Lapidot, around these times doing anything. So there's different ways of reading Tanakh. One is what's called closed canon, and one's called open canon. Nothing to do with warfare, right? Canon over here with 2 ends, not 3 ends, right? So canon means to say the corpus of material. So open canon means to say is if we're introduced to a new character, we say, okay, we have a new character. This is somebody we don't know about, and the reason why I don't know about them is they didn't really feature so much. They weren't really a central figure, so they were only mentioned once. So she's mentioned in relationship to her husband. Her husband really wasn't a player. He really wasn't involved in major historical events that were going to be documented for history, so we're fine with that. However, there's what's called a closed canon approach, which is that we try to understand the characters that we have through the prism of the playable we already have, which means say we want to identify them through the people we already have. Who the people already have. So one of the observations which is made, Chazal already made say this, is the word lapid means torch, a fire, right? And so it happens to be there's another person whose name is similar to that, and that is Barak. Barak means lightning, right? Or light, illumination. So some people say maybe she is married to Barak, which if that's the case, that adds a level of intrigue. It is a little complicated to suggest that because it was obviously a long distance marriage then, because he lives in Kadesh Naphtali, which is in the north, and she lives in Ramah and Beit El. Right. On the other hand, she does have an office, right, and so she is dealing with the public. So maybe that's just where that was in the central part of Israel. Maybe that was necessary. But be it as it may, there's a little bit of intrigue as to what is the relationship to Barak. Is she reaching out to an unknown general in the north, or are they married? And that's why she is encouraging him to do his job in this respect. This is part of the discussion, which is added understanding it. By the way, in case you weren't aware, I just put on page 5, that is a picture of Marc Chagall, Deborah le Prophetess, right? So he wrote, he actually drew a picture of this. Notice, by the way, that the palm tree he drew was clearly not a palm tree because he was living in Europe, right? So that's what happens is that if you don't live in Israel, then you don't know what's going on in the thing. Much like that, most people translate the word tzvi to mean a deer. There were no deers in Israel. Tzvi refers to a gazelle, right? So it's just to understand. Rashi really points this out in the Gemara in Chulin, is that we're not dealing with deers. Deers are European animals. We're in the Middle East. So it just depending on what you have in front of you, you obviously see things slightly differently. Now let's just look at the geography for a second. Come with me to page 6. You'll notice where does she sit. She sits central. She's in the Hare Ephraim and Binyamin, right? So that's where she lives. Okay. But this whole intrigue is happening by the Sea of the Galilee, by the Kinneret. The tribes that in question that are being affected are Naphtali and Zvulun primarily, and even Yisachar. They're the tribes that surround the Dead Sea, or the Kinneret on the western side. Which is why when she turns to Barak comes from Keresh Naphtali. He comes from Naphtali. Right, so this is the further reaches of the kingdom which are being affected. Devorah is a central leader, right? So she is in central Israel, and now she's reaching out to the northern tribes to defend themselves. Just understand the geography of what's happening. To me, this is interesting because we're seeing something which is new in both the enemy and in the defense against the enemy. In the enemy, we see this is the first time we have a local enemy. Beforehand, all the enemies came from the outside. Right, so beforehand we had Eglon is Moab, that was a separate tribe outside of Israel. Then we had Aram, which is who was our with Othniel, who was our problem? Our problem came from the far north, right? So outside of Israel. But now we have somebody who actually is an inhabitant. This is the first time we have the six, like Hashem prophesied, if you don't remove them, there are going to be thorns in your side. Tzedim, but they're going to be these thorns in your side and in your eyes. This is happening now. This is the first time it happens in the time of Devorah. The same time in the protagonist, we also see the same thing, which is unusual, which is now we have, as opposed to Ehud, who was a Benjaminite who is being affected by the incursion of the Moabites into Benjaminite territory in Yericho. Now we have somebody from central Israel sending commands to northern Israel. We see the movement towards we'll call cross-tribal responsibility, right? So Devorah, it's not her problem, right? In a certain sense, meaning she could live quietly in the mountains of Ephraim because the chariots never will come to the mountains. If you spend time driving in Yehuda and Shomron today, which is north of Jerusalem, it's all mountains. No chariots would ever succeed coming there. So she's quite happy, but she is taking the responsibility as a leader for the northern tribes which are stuck in the Jezreel Valley, who are now subject to this incursion. So just to appreciate that this is a change in both the enemy and the response to the enemy is different. We're seeing a internal enemy and a national response, which is a profound and says a lot about the leadership as well. Why was she under a palm tree? So some say, well, the palm tree is just, if you go to Israel, right? That's what it is. But the truth is, where are palm trees primarily grown? They're grown in the Jordan Valley, right? So if you go down from Jerusalem down to the Jordan Valley to the Dead Sea, that's where all the plantations of the palm trees are. And the suggestion is that maybe it's part of that. Is this sort of, it's connected to the Jericho side of things. Interestingly enough, the Rashi points out is that maybe she is a sign of riches, right? So she's a very successful woman. She has an estate, right, where she lives, which is what allows her to be a leader. If she's always struggling for the next election campaign, it's very hard to be a leader if there's re-elections every 2 years. She is very comfortable. She does not need anybody, which is the qualifications of a judge in the Torah. Is that a person needs to be a person who's rich because they are no longer affected by the bribes or the concerns of others. More than that, the Gemara actually says, maybe the reason why she had a palm tree was because she judged people outside. Because as a woman, she wanted to avoid any concerns of yichud or even any suspicions of seclusion as well. So she had an open door policy. This works in Israel where it's a beautiful Mediterranean climate, and so even in February you're able to do this. In America that would not work, but this is what the Gemara says. Note, by the way, that she is one in the Gemara of 7 prophetesses. So she is a card-carrying, credentialed prophetess, as the Tanakh says. But she is receiving prophecy. She's the leader of the time. People are coming to her in judgment. It is worthwhile noting that there is a whole discussion in halacha as to what level of role did she have. The Gemara makes the observation. If you look in source 14, the Gemara tells us, the Gemara says, anybody who is able to halachically give testimony is able to testify. And then it says, Yesh kosher lahayid, but ain kosher ladun. But there are those who are kosher to testify, but cannot act as a judge. Meaning, a judge is a very small cadre of people able to be this. Which leads the Gemara to say, the Tosafos says, wait a second, what about Devorah? Devorah is not technically speaking kosher la'edus, but she is a Dianus. How does that work precisely? That's what the Tosfos already asks that Gemara. So he presents in source 15 4 answers. His first answer is the Gemara is saying, "Call ish hakosher ladun kosher lahayet," meaning it's not precluding a woman from judgment. It's just saying any man has to also be kosher la'edus, to be a judge. So it's limiting the scope of what the Gemara was saying, which in this case, then a woman is fine to be a judge. The second answer is inami nihid b'nidoinin havi isha bichlal mikol makom b'dayanim ena isha bichlal v'dvara ha'isladana al piyah dibur. So we're limiting the litigants, not the judges. Again, allowing a woman to judge. Inami lo ha'isladana ela melamedes lahem dinim. Maybe she didn't have the stamp or the signature on the. She was the advisory. She was the most knowledgeable person of the generation, offering advice to all the cases. But technically speaking, she desisted from actually issuing judgments. And finally, the Yerushalmi seems to say, "Poisel isha ladun." No, a woman is not halachically able to be a dayan, but rather she just taught. So she had more of an educational capacity than she did as a, we'll call it administrative capacity, is what Tosfos says. Another possibility the Sefer HaChinuch deals with, because these are all obvious questions that need to be addressed. Sefer HaChinuch says maybe at the end, "Oy nomash shekibla ladun aleihem roshei Yisrael v'acharein kol adam yodun al piyah. De Kabbalah vadaya kol ksherim." Like, okay, so maybe technically speaking, the law is that women don't take an administrative seat in judgment, but they accepted her. She was the most qualified, capable person, and therefore the acceptance of her was sufficient. That was the grounds for this leadership. We'll call the halachic decisors, the Rishonim are sort of struggling with, wait a second, it seems to be this is not the practice today, but it clearly was then. How does this work? They're trying to work this. What interests me is not the intrigue perhaps of we'll call the halachic status of her role, but I'm more interested in her type of role of leadership. That's what intrigues me. And to this, the Midrash, the Yalkut Shimoni, does give 2 observations. These things are 2 very profound observations. The first thing the Yalkut says is Dvora Ishanavia, Mativa Shel Dvora. What is her nature? Shinis Nabeis Al Yisrael v'Shavtoesam, that she prophesied and judged them. Va'aloi Pinchas ben Elazar Omeid Meid Ani Alai Es Hashemayim Oretz. So he says, wait a second. Where's Pinchas? Pinchas is around. We know we're going to see Pinchas later on. The end of the book of Shoftim, we're going to see Pinchas is still around. So where is he? There's a battle happening. There is assimilation, intermarriage happening. There is attrition. What's going on? Where is he? So he says, by the heavens and the earth, the Midrash says, Ben Goy Ben Yisrael, Ben Ish Ben Isha, Ben Ever Ben Shifcha, Kol Lefi Masa Shel Adam, Ruach HaKodesh Shareh Alav. The Midrash says that Judaism is a meritocracy. It doesn't make a difference who you are. The point is that if you are qualified and you are stepping up into leadership, God will give Ruach HaKodesh to such a person as well. So this is the way that the Yalkut looks at this particular scene, which speaks to the idea of what is leadership. Is leadership a position you are given? Or is it stepping into the void when nothing's being done? And so, again, as we talked about in Sefer Yoshua, perhaps responsibility follows, it's not that responsibility is given to those who have the ability, but perhaps ability is given to those who take responsibility. Meaning, she takes responsibility and therefore she's given the ability. Hashem says, look, she's doing what Pinchas is clearly absent in doing, right? So we need to, Hashem therefore gives her the necessary leadership tools. Then he goes on to say, he quotes the Tana of Eliyahu, also an early Midrash, in fact, her husband was a simple fellow, right? אז יהיה חלקך בין הקשרים שבהם ותבוא לך אל המבא. והיא עושה פסילוס והוא מוליך לבית המקדש. So the Midrash then goes and says, well, let's go back to that Eishes Lapidos. Why she's called Eishes Lapidos? Because a lapid literally means a torch. So what would she do? Her husband he married higher than his calling, right? So she's it. And he's a regular guy, and so she says, I really want you to be a successful fellow. So she makes the wicks and sends him off to Shiloh to present the wicks to be used in the Beis Hamikdash. So she's giving him like a use. She's giving him a function. She's giving him a direction over here. I believe that this is very much also the way that whether you see Barak or not as her husband, she's doing the same thing with him, right? Let's assume that they're not married for a second. Let's assume according to Pshat, Barak and Lapidos are different people. But she's doing the same thing. What she's saying is like really, she's kind of running the show, right? And what she's saying to him is I want you to take 10,000 people and go up to that mountain and God's going to do the rest, right? So she's essentially giving him a function. She's got the prophecy. She knows the know-how. She's the leader, but she needs somebody else to do the job. So she's delegating in a way that makes the person themselves feel good with, which is to me is a really fascinating role of over here, which is described. Lahavdil, now I'm sorry to quote this, but Lahavdil, if you ever watch My Big Fat Greek Wedding, right? There's a beautiful scene where the wife and the daughter needs to try to get the husband and the father to realize that they need to give the daughter a job, right? So they kind of like set up the scene, and he's sitting in the restaurant, and they say to him, you know what I'm talking about, right? Yeah. And they say, there's a computer job which is missing, and your daughter's got a computer degree, and he's sitting there, and suddenly, the electricity connects, and he's like, oh, she should get the job, and they're like, oh, what a great idea. And they give her the job. But what she's doing essentially is she's enabling her husband to be successful. She's enabling Barak to be successful. She is the leader in this entire intrigue. We'll get to why this is so central to this book, because there's a great irony that I think Tanakh is identifying. Yeah, but let's do a little bit more, and then we'll get there. So first of all, this battle itself. We don't hear so many details about the battle. Right, but it seems to be there's this unbelievable miracle that happens, and they're saved. How does this happen precisely? So I put in over here actually a 1692 painting by Luca Giordano, which is called The Defeat of Sisera. Right. So now, as in the era, you can see they're pretty dark pictures, so it's always hard to make out. But what do you notice interesting about this picture? The angels. Isn't that interesting? Right. So you'll notice there's a battle going on the ground, and there's the water and so on, and the horses are falling and tumbling. But above them are angels. I do believe, if I'm not mistaken, those are wands in their hands. There's the angel on the left has got a hammer in the hand, but the ones the ones on the right seem to be pointing down towards the waters which are massing. And now, where did he get this from? So the answer is he did not get it from Perek Daled. He got it from Perek Hay, which we're going to do next week. Because if you understand this battle through the prism of how she recounts it, listen to how Devorah talks about this battle when she reflects on it. In source 18, she says, "Min shemayin nilchamu ha'kochavim misilasam nilchamu Sisera." From the heavens, the stars fought this battle against Sisera. Nach al Kishon garfam, the torrent of Kishon swept them away. Nach al kadamim nach al Kishon tidrechi nafshi oz. The brook of Kishon swept them away with the power and the courage. Az holmu ikvei sus midaros daros abirav. The horses' hooves pounded as headlong galloped the steeds. By the way, you see the poetry here. We'll get back to what the structure and the poetry is over here. Is that daros abirav is the horses are tumbling over and falling. So clearly this is taken literally, and many of the Mefarshim understand this. There was some heavenly force that was acting in this battle, that was entering this battle and was making this battle successful in beyond the comprehensible way. I would like to make a suggestion that I did see in the Maggid series. Rabbi Hatton has got a beautiful observation on this, which I think has great merit, and that is that this may be true, and this may be the way she's describing it. But it is possible that it actually happened in a way which is explicable as well, without having the angels and wands, right? So just to understand what this means, is first of all the language which is used to describe how to gather the people who clearly seem reticent to gather, if we go back to Psukim Vav and Zayin, the bottom, this is source 20, bottom page 8, she calls Barak ben Abinoam, and she says, Lech ubashachta bahar tavor. Pull them to Har Tavar. Already you can see they're reticent. They don't want to come. In the next pasuk, Umashachti eglecha el nachal Kishon Sisera sar tzavah. It's like she's orchestrating this battle. She's saying, you pull them into Har Tabar, and I'm going to pull Sisera to the valley, and then this battle will ensue. But the word Meshicha is interesting because it does mean draw, but it's usually used in the context of water, right? It's usually used by a well, right? You're pulling up, you're drawing water. The word Meshicha refers to the pulling of liquids. The reason why this is so fascinating is if you look at the topography of the whole area, just really fascinating to notice. Take a look at the top of page 9. So this is from the Holman Bible Maps, in the map 43, which is called Deborah's Victory over the Canaanites. So going north-south is the Jordan Valley, right? So you have the Kinneret going down into the Jordan River. That's the north-south meridian. But I'm interested actually in the west-east meridian, if you look at this for a moment. So you see where the red peg is, that's where the Battle of Har Tabor works. But to me, what I'm interested in is that valley which goes from where the battle takes place on Har Tabor to all the way to the city of Akko, to the Mediterranean Sea. That valley is called the Jezreel Valley. That's a very fertile valley. That's through which the Kishon River runs. Okay, so this is where this battle happens. If you take a look, this is a picture actually in 1890, one of the earliest color pictures in the land of Israel of Mount Tabor. It looks like an overturned bowl, right? It's a very large mountain which overlooks the Kishon Brook. And in the writings of Dennis Bailey, when he describes the beginning of the 20th century to the Kishon Valley, he describes dry in its upper courses in the summer and only a trickle when it passes Haroshet near its end. This famous stream is often a sad disappointment to visitors, meaning the Kishon stream is not the Mississippi, right? Then he goes on. The Kishon, small as though it is, has to carry the entire drainage from the surrounding hills, but is twice hindered by this formidable task. Once by the volcanic causeway, and then again by the narrow defile through which it finds its way to the Bay of Akko. In consequence, the two basins thus formed are only too easily flooded in the winter, sometimes for prolonged periods. And W.M. Thompson, who knew this country well a century and a half ago, speaks of having no little trouble in its bottomless mire and tangled grass. In February 1905, Gertrude Bell wrote even more feelingly of riding from Haifa to Jenin. The road lay across the plain of Esdraelon, and the mud was incredible. We waited sometimes for an hour at a time, knee-deep in clinging mud. The mules fell down, the donkeys almost disappeared, and the horses grew wearier and wearier. Yet it was always the rich valley, for once dried out, the bottomless mud bears notable harvests. So it's a very fertile valley, but it floods fast in the winter. It is very possible that what is happening over here is again the miracle of an incredible storm which now essentially neutralizes the chariots of the Canaanites. The Canaanites dominate the plains, they dominate the valleys. But when God decides that the time has come for the waters to come and wash them away, there's nothing they can do to stop. Yes, it was miraculous. Yes, it was the angels of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but it wasn't angels with wands. It was the forces of HaKadosh Baruch Hu choosing to wash them away. Moshachta. I'm going to pull them away and make them defective. Interestingly enough, if you look at just the top page 11, I just think this is such a beautiful thing. If you ever have a chance to watch the debate between Richard Dawkins and Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, I mentioned this over Yom Tov, it's such a profound, it's a little too fast. It's a little too fast because the BBC moderator moves from subject to subject too fast to allow the arguments to develop, but they at least give it a sense of these arguments. It's pretty profound that you have one of the world's greatest atheists is debating a religious figure, and the religious figure they chose was a Jew, right? Who's the smallest of the small in England. In England, there are more people who identify themselves as Jedi Knights than Jews. Just to like this, So in the census, but nonetheless, so in this observation, he's talking about the literalism of the Bible. And he says, do you believe this happened? Do you believe that happened? And Richard Dawkins is talking about, he's like jeering at all these religious people who, especially in America, he says these religious priests who think all these things happened. And then he says, do you believe the splitting of the sea happened? And Sachs says, absolutely. Right? And he's, look at that. So Sachs says, I can explain it scientifically, but I'm not interested in explaining it scientifically because I'm trying to explain to you, why did the Torah write it? The Torah did not write this to show that winds of 67 miles per hour are possible in the Sinai Peninsula, which could hold water at bay. That's not why the Torah wrote that, these are demonstrable scientific experiments which have been shown. that's not why the Torah wrote it. And listen to this quote in source 25. And here it is. We have a picture of the weakest of the weak, a group of escaping slaves, and a group of the strongest of the strong. I mean, the ancient Egypt of the pharaohs was the longest lived and greatest empire the world has ever known. It lasted for 3,000 years. It was absolutely the height of its time in Ramses II. It had the latest military technology, the horse-drawn chariot. So you have the strongest of the strong against the weakest of the weak. And here comes the one place on earth, the one circumstance in which the weak can cross over because they're on foot, and the ones who are in horse-drawn chariots are trapped and stuck in the mud. Meaning, what Hashem is doing is Hashem is inverting power in Yam Suf. It's the demonstration of the lack of power of the powerful and the power of the weakest. That's what's being described at Kriyas Yam Suf. Is that not being repeated over here as well? Right? That's precisely the point. The mightiest are falling in the natural rainfall, right? In the natural storm, they are rendered useless against the footmen of the Israelites. And Hashem says, I run this show. You're with me, it works. You're not with me, it doesn't work. That's what's being demonstrated. Let's not get lost in the mechanics of it. Let's understand the point of the mechanics. That's what Rabbi Sachs was pointing out, just so profoundly obvious when he was referring to this as well. And by the way, this clearly is where J.R.R. Tolkien pulled the scene from in the first book of Lord of the Rings, right? So if anybody has the opportunity to, you have to read this. I'm saying you don't want to fall asleep under Lord of the Rings because it could suffocate you. It's a very big book. But the beginning of the Fellowship of the Ring, and in chapter 6, it's called Towards the Ford, and it describes how the bearer of the ring, who's Frodo, is escaping the ring wraiths, who are these undead nine past kings who are corrupted by the power of the rings, and they're tracing after him, and he's trying to seek. He has been stabbed, and he's in the process of dying. Actually, he crosses the river. And as he crosses the river, this is described, at that moment in source 24, there came a roaring and rushing, a noise of loud waters rolling many stones. Dimly Frodo saw the river below him rise, and down along its course there came plumed cavalry of waves. White flames seemed to Frodo to flicker on their crests, and he half fancied that amid the water, white riders upon white horses with frothing manes. The three riders that were still in the midst of the ford were overwhelmed. They disappeared, buried suddenly under angry foam, and those behind drew back in dismay. So it's protected by this river, this little brook, turning into this raging river. J.R.R. Tolkien took it from Shoftim Perek Dalet. He was very much a Bible scholar. He was born in Bloemfontein, South Africa, just in case you're wondering. And the only moment of grandeur from Bloemfontein, let me tell you. He in fact created his own Bible to describe Lord of the Rings. He clearly read the Bible, and he's taking this from there. So it's amazing. Like, all these kids are like, wow, it's so cool, fantasy. It's like, yeah, just read Tanakh. It's all there. It's all there. Just learn it. It's much more meaningful, and it actually has import on our own way of living. Last point, and we're going to close with this, and that is Yael. We're going to spend a little more time with Yael next week, because most of her story is actually in the song, not in this over here. But it is worthwhile noting that she comes from the Cani. Who are the Cani precisely? The Cani are actually descendants of Yisro. Yisro was, there's a whole discussion, did he convert? Did he semi-convert his family when he left Moshe Rabbeinu? He goes back, and they live among Israel. And we're going to meet them again and again and again in all kinds of battles. They, generally speaking, live in the south. They live near the Amaleki in the south of Israel, in the Negev desert. This particular branch of the family, under Chever, broke away from the family and are living in the north, living in Keresh and Naphtali. They have an alliance with the Canaanites, which is a very prudent way of ensuring safety and your future, because you make a deal with the greatest power around, which at this time is the Canaanites. So this is what happens here, but she breaks rank. And what is fascinating to me is the question the Malbim asks in the name of the Marikra. Marikra is Rav Yosef Kara, not to be confused with the author of the Shulchan Aruch. Marikra was one of the earlier medieval commentators. You're going to Rishonim on Tanakh. He appears in many of the basic Mikras Gedolos. The Malbim quotes the Marikra, who asks the following question. Source 28, and we close with this because I think it's a really incredible point. Is that he says, Vinay, Mari, the Marikra asks, Sha'al po, Eich asta Yael kadavar harazeh, la roges Yisro achar shashalom beinoi, ubein beis ba'alo, ubob al baisov, zed neged chukei medinos. She's breaking international law. Right? After all, they were in contract. They had an international treaty with the Canaanites. You're not allowed to just break treaties like that. Meaning, like, all the moral, ideas she may have, and bad guys, good guys, she's jeopardizing the future. They're never going to believe her family again. She's putting herself at risk. Why would she do this? So the Malbim says two answers. He says, Ani Omer, the Malbim says, Lefi kefi shitasai, Hine shalom shebein Yavin ubein Chever, haya shalom kolel im bnei Keni ashochnim b'midbar Yehuda, shal ze Omar ubein beis Chever HaKeni, v'atosh nifrad Chever me'es achiv v'not alo ela ben bnei Yisrael, ein alo chiyuv habris shal bnei Keni, ki nifrad mehem. So the first answer is that Chever moved away. The peace that was had was with the southern Keni. Chever moved away and lived among the Israelites, and therefore by doing so, he'd already broken this. The accord was no longer binding upon him. That's what the Malbim says. But then he renders a second answer, and I think this answer underscores this entire chapter, and that is as follows. He says, "Uvatama beis." The second reason is Komoshikos Mari. The Mari himself answers this question. He says, "Shenos el oil Yahel." He ran to the tent not of Chever, he ran to the tent of Yael. Va'isha petura midyanis, v'hi astazos lo l'ba'ala. She was not bound by the contract because she was not a warrior. So therefore, she was in fact able to murder him. Now let's just understand this. I think explains the entire parak. This line in the Malbim. Why? Because she was precluded from battle. Meaning, why was it not binding on women? Is because women don't fight wars. Right? Meaning they don't bear arms and they don't go to war and they're not on the battlefield, right? And therefore the contract, technically speaking, does not affect, the deal did not affect, the treaty did not affect the women folk. And the irony is who runs this entire battle. Devorah describes herself in the next parak, Shikamti Ein Yisrael, I'm a mother. She describes herself as a mother. Who's the Yael? Eishes Chever HaKeni. She's described as a wife, right? So here you have people who, in a certain sense, are, on the fringes of the scene, right, technically speaking in this day, right, who don't have the role, and yet they are the ones, coming back to Devorah's sentence, she says, Barak, you may go to battle, but the battle will be won by a woman. She's not referring to herself, she's referring to Yael. Right? Meaning, that's the prophecy that she's essentially saying is there's going to be a woman who wins this battle. And think more than that. Think about the tools that are used over here. She doesn't go to her husband's tent and pulls out, his M4 automatic rifle, and he's a lifelong member of the NRA in Israel. Like, no, she goes and she gets the tent peg, right? Meaning to say this is a domesticated instrument, something that she would, as she's a homemaker. And here you have the homemaker becoming the warrior. And in a certain sense, there's almost like a level of satire in this parak of the Tanakh, saying she's disqualified from the treaty because she's a woman, but ultimately she wins the battle because she's a woman. Right? That's the irony over here. And the parak calls into question is, who are the leaders over here? Right? We're going to meet Be'ezras Hashem next week, the third woman. Okay, we'll call it, or in a certain sense, the missing leader, which we're going to deal with Be'ezras Hashem, who does not appear in this parak. But this parak calls into questions that I believe the Tanakh is, in a certain sense, satirizing the leadership, because there is an absence of men leadership, and into that absence we have very powerful but silent leadership of Devorah and Yael. Okay, we're going to hold it here. Thank you.